Hello, everybody. We're here for another episode of Martial Praxis. This time, I'm joined by Eric Shahan. He's translated a number of texts on a wide range of topics. I have two of his books, both about ninjutsu, but I've also seen you did a few jujutsu translations as well, correct?
That's correct.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Really appreciate you being here. And taking the time to answer some of my hopefully not too silly questions about ninja.
No problem.
um, I guess one of the big questions I have, and we were kind of just chatting about this a little bit, is like, what is authentic ninjutsu look like, at least according to the historical record and the text that you've translated, which come from Japan in a later period than the ninja were really like supposed to live. It seems like they were kind of like revivalists, but one of the things you hear in the very pseudo intellectual martial arts community is, oh well, there's no real documentation of what ninja did, and it seems that maybe this is something that might be true generally, but there are certainly some exceptions given the work that you've done and the stuff you've translated.
Oh, yes, that's exactly right. So the first books I started translating were done around 1917, and I had a lot of people request that I translate this book called Ninjutsu no Gokui, which is the essence of ninjutsu. And because, well, they were frankly, it was the first of the modern books about ninjutsu that were ever published. And this guy, the author, he was very popular newspaper writer at the time, and he not only looked at the current popularity of ninjutsu, this is in 1917, but he also went back and examined some historical documents, one of which is called the Shoninki, which was, I can't recall exactly when it was written, but I think it was in the Edo period, so but somewhere between 1600 and 1868. And so what he did was he looked at the modern what was happening in modern day Japan, and modern day Japan is again early 1900s, and there were a lot of ninja themed kind of there's a lot of ninja themed entertainment going on. So in Tokyo, Asakusa was kind of like where you went to entertain yourself. You could see plays and all kinds of burlesque shows and things like that. And they also had kind of a little bit later in the 1920s, they started having kind of magic shows and hypnotism shows and things like that. And those were becoming really popular. And some of the people were saying that what they were doing was ninjutsu. They were basically just kind of using ninjutsu as a cover for any kind of parlor tricks that they were showing. So Gingetsu Ito, the author of that book I translated, he went and actually delved into the old text and tried to lay out the fact that while, yes, uh, ninja used things like spider techniques, it wasn't actually turning into a spider. They were simply able to they had physically conditioned themselves to the degree that they could scamper up a wall so fast that to the untrained eye, it appeared as if they had just suddenly disappeared from view. So he tried to lay out a factual basis for the ninjutsu techniques. And basically, the primary one was supreme physical conditioning and an ability to endure uncomfortable situations, like being underwater or laying in covert, uh, uh, what do you call it? Laying under cover for long periods of time and
Yeah.
enduring with no food and no water.
That's very interesting. So that's where the connection between like ninjutsu and senjutsu kind of comes along, right? Like because sort of like sage practices that are associated with, I think, shugendo would be
Mhm.
useful in that regard of like if you're gonna maybe like taking the essence of plants, making like pills and stuff so that you could survive without access to regular food and water, and the extensive fasting and that type of stuff as being useful training for a ninja who has to do espionage type activities.
Yeah, you have to remember that the medicine in Japan that's all the medicine was it was based on Chinese herbology that had been
Yeah.
imported long ago. So there's a little bit like the notion that ninja were using the plants as medicine. Well, that's the only medicine that was available for everything. So you basically, there were some, what do you call it? Medicines that were produced by traveling. There was actually, they didn't really have so many pharmacies as they had traveling pharmaceutical guys with backpacks, with these
Yes.
backpacks that would travel around Japan and sell people different kinds of painkillers and just medicines, general purpose medicines and things like that. So um, they did in fact use those kind of medicines, and those I have translated some documents from the 17th or the 18th century and the 17th century, and they do mention these kind of you have to get this certain kind of bark and this certain kind of herb, and also as well you mentioned the shugendo, like the meditative practices. Those were also basically common amongst everybody, samurai, and just the work, the working class people, farmers and city folk as well. They would use things like uh, um, Kuji. I don't know if you know Kuji, like the nine
Yeah,
seals.
yeah, yeah. That's one of the books I actually have from you is on Kuji.
Right. So that's a practice that a lot of people, it was popular with a lot of people. Just people
Yeah.
traveling alone would do the Kuji and stuff like that. So uh, there's a, while for example, Gingetsu Ito uses that to, it- he says ninja do use it, but it's just simply a form of meditation.
Yes.
There's no actual, what do you call it, underlying belief specific. It's just something to focus the mind.
Yeah, yeah,
For
yeah.
for example, like some I read a long time ago, there was in a war. I can't remember which the war was. It was in Europe in like the 1700s. Like there was some king that wanted the communion done over and over again. Catholic communion. Wanted the priest just to do it again and again. And it sounds a lot like what happens with Kuji. He couldn't get focused. He's like, okay, let's get that. Let's do the
Yeah.
communion rites again, and just keep
Yeah,
doing
he's
it
like, do the
until
whole mass again. Come on, I'm
yeah,
not in the zone yet.
yeah, he's not getting in the zone. It kind of that really struck me when I read that. It's like, yeah, this guy is. I can't remember the battle now. I think it was between the French and the English, but some one king was like just kept having the priest do the ceremony over and over again
Well,
to
you actually
really
see stuff like this kind of across the board, right? I mean, even like
right.
the famous story with like Constantine painting the cross on the back of the shields. Like, I actually have a really nice text on war magic. It's like an
Mhm.
academic survey from around the world talking about instances where in various battles and situations people would utilize either magic ritual or various things to try to focus their themselves or their forces. So it makes sense that this type of thing would be popular, and also if it's already like woven in with the culture and something that people are doing,
Mhm.
that's naturally going to show up in martial arts as well. There's a strong tradition in Tibetan Buddhism called like Chulen, which means like
Mhm.
taking the essence, where they'll make special pills. It's somewhat it's related to Tibetan medicine, which is obviously very similar to Chinese traditional medicine. Um, but it's almost like its own little separate thing, maybe a little bit more superstitious in some ways. Like it has a little bit more elements of sympathetic magic. Um, but they'll
Right. So
make pills
you're not taking you're not taking a large volume, you're taking a very small volume, and it's certainly not going to be enough to actually sustain you nutrient
yes.
wise. But is it a psychological adaptation that they're using? So,
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting because some of the formulas, like I have them or I've seen them, and they're a mixture of sort of important psychological things. Like they'll have like a piece of like a famous monk's robe in it, or like
mhm.
he dipped his toe in it or something like that. So there's like this like sympathetic kind of magic element, and then there's like very small amounts of certain herbs that sometimes they could be helpful for various things. Some of them are even harmful. I've seen some formulas that are heavy in aconites, which we know now to be quite toxic. So
Yeah, Japanese makeup, it was heavy into lead and stuff like that. And
yeah,
sorry, hang on just one second.
yes, yes.
back on track.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting also that you bring up like the hypnotism and sort of the parlor tricks element, because you see this stuff in other places like in the sadhu tradition in India, right?
Mm,
You have the traveling holy people who obviously some of them are very legitimate practitioners of, you know, yoga and things like this, but then there's also kind of a division of that that involves stuff like, you know, hypnotism, or even in, I think more in Malaysia, in connection to like spirit possession stuff, you'll see people jamming you know, like metal rods through their body in various places. And these things, both on the end of being like parlor tricks, like sort of like stage magic stuff, but also on the end of things that are more involved control of the subconscious, like hypnotism or jamming the spikes through yourself, that they actually are loosely related to martial arts in some ways,
mm.
especially, you know, like kind of non-dueling styles of combat, right? Because something like a parlor trick could actually be useful in that regard. Or I've even
Mhm.
uh there's a guy who's become popular now, Ed Calderon, who does he was a like Mexican counter cartel guy, and
Oh yeah, yeah, great guy.
one of the things he talks about that's kind of interesting is going to a place and doing magic tricks for the kids. So like if he's doing, you know, like basically like reconnaissance work somewhere, he'll go and he'll find some street kids and show them a few magic tricks and get them kind of like endeared to him, and then use them for plug them for information. So
Oh,
it's like, you know, these things, like you think, oh well, what the heck does doing a stage trick have to do with being a spy? It's like, well, actually could be really valuable. Or, you know, winning a bet in a bar with one of these things and then being able to plug that person for information, or just disarming them socially so that you can kind of blend in.
mm. That's a very interesting point because the guy that basically the guy whose book I translated first was Gingetsu Ito, and that was in 1917. He wrote Ninjutsu no Gokui, the Essence of Ninjutsu, and in that he talks about how ninjutsu, while it's described as, you know, using kind of like powers of a rat or powers of a slug or something like that, there's actually an underlying meaning, which is like if you're using a rat to like sneak in to someplace, or a spider you're using it to climb up a walls, which does in fact take extreme physical conditioning. And then
Yes.
the guy that came after him is Fujita Seiko, who was supposedly the last Koga ninja. And he, in the 1920s, was all over the place, all over Japan, doing these performances of basically parlor tricks, things like you know, putting a concrete block on your chest and having another guy smash it with a hammer, and you know, bending an iron bar with his neck and things like that. All of which take, and what he was doing is he was kind of like a little bit of a, I don't know, early Penn and Teller, where they like he reveals the trick of the trade for each of these tricks after he does it. So
Uh,
he was into that kind of the scientific. Hey, look at this, I can bend this. I'm not using any illusion. That what I'm doing is I'm, you know, I'm focusing my weight here, and I'm actually like, you know, bending my body this way to take care of this, and I'm hitting the rock on my stomach a certain way in order to not actually injure myself. But at the same time, he also did, so he was basically doing, he was calling his show ninjutsu, then demonstrating these tricks and saying it was like due to his paranormal powers. Then he would reveal they were not, in fact, didn't in fact have anything to do with anything paranormal. And then he would go on to actually do quite impressive things like climb up the corner of a wall, kind of like a modern day parkour guy, or stick needles through his arms, through his tongue, and stuff like that. So things that took, you know, real focus and dedication to purpose to pull off, you know, especially if he's pulling them off regularly.
yeah. And in front of people, people underestimate, like, you know, it's like you could do this thing, you know, alone in your bedroom pretty well, but then, you know, get in front of a crowd and it's a bit harder.
Well, and Fujita Seiko, this was done. The book I'm talking about is called Ninja Magic, and he did these tricks in front of police groups and military groups in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. He was doing them in the 1940s in Japan. So, you know, that's a there were so a lot of those people had a lot of experience doing martial arts themselves. So he probably would not have been able to pull off kind of like just pranks if there wasn't some underlying, fundamental underlying skill involved.
Well, yeah, that's the thing too that strikes me about some of this stuff too is so, there's a notion that okay, well, it's a parlor trick, it's fake, but some of these things actually require quite a bit of concentration and focus to be able to pull off. I
Mm.
actually, when I was a kid, was really into doing like stage magic, like I would do like little cabaret shows and stuff, and
Oh, wow.
some of these they're tricks obviously, but it does require a level of focus and showmanship. And there's also an aspect of like sort of like the cloak and the dagger type thing. So, if you're able to use the cloak really well, it increases your ability to do the dagger part as well, right? So
Mhm.
it seems in some ways it might seem, I think, divorced from martial arts to on the surface, but there's actually a little bit of, I mean, at least for me, I see a relationship there between being able to fool someone with a trick and being able to fool someone in combat, right? Like there's kind of an inherent connection there. And I think,
I mean, definitely an overlap. Absolutely, yeah.
and I feel like that kind of speaks to the idea of like what ninjutsu is supposed to be, right? Like it's the quality of being hidden as opposed to, jujitsu, which is utilizing this softness to overcome the opponent. We're using deception.
Hmm. So yeah, that's he goes on. He has another Gingetsuito. I actually kind of did his books in a weird order. I did like the second one first, and then I did the third one, and then I found it. Then I found the first one. It was like,
Ah,
but it was like really really hard to find, and I finally dug it up. And yeah, the his third book about ninjutsu talks about that. It's basically um, it discusses basically the whole purpose of ninjutsu is to just to distract your opponent while you do something else. And so there's that mental aspect you have to master while at the same time being, utterly and completely physically fit because your body has to be able to make use of it. You have to mentally be able to distract your opponent, but at the same time, you also have to be able to physically uh, carry out the your objective. So
does he ever get into what some of these methods of physical conditioning are like, or what the
now
training was, or he just is like, I'm able to do this stuff?
no, there's almost none of that in anything. There's nothing in anything. The only thing that I found is recommend is old. I think I translated a book called The Hundred Rules of War,
Hmm.
and in that it's like basically go hunting and fishing, and that's you got to think about going hunting and fishing as a samurai back in the day. You'd have to load up your horse, get your hawk, get your boys or your sons and your other samurai warriors, and you'd ride out for like a day, and
Yeah,
then
yeah, yeah.
camping and hunt. So it was like basically it's just exercise. You're picking stuff up, putting stuff down, you're stumbling through the woods, you're gutting deer, things like that. So that was like basically the exercise. So there was
Makes
no
sense. I mean, if you do enough of that, you'll get pretty strong.
if you've been just ride, I'm sure just riding a horse. I haven't really ridden a horse much in my life, but I'm sure just riding a horse for like 5 or 6 days in a row is going to be taxing.
No,
Plus, if you're
absolutely.
doing hunting and stuff like that. But they did do uh, um, their dojo sessions were really long, as far as I know. They started early and they do like 2 sessions a day. Um, but as far as like something tangible, no, just they did training and they did hunting and fishing. So that's really
How
it.
how legitimate was Seikyo's claim to being like the last Koga ninja? Was that just something he kind of billed himself as, or was there
Yeah,
anything to that?
truthfully, I'm that's one aspect of research I can't get really excited about is lineages. Like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's
like,
quite boring.
well, it is. It's boring and like it's a lot of it's really inconclusive, Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of people forging documents and a lot of people like taking over schools that had really gone into to decline. So the school's in decline. The famous school in decline has been going around for years, and then someone comes in and maybe kind of works out some deal and gets to be the head of it. So is he legitimate or not legitimate? Like what? And then he goes on to operate that school for 100 years and his successors. So then what are we talking about? Like,
No,
I
no,
don't.
no. This is a very legitimate point, and I think there's a number of things like this going on in the martial arts world. There's
Oh
something going on
yes.
in the Chinese martial arts world right now that's very similar to this, where, you know, it being named the head of a particular school or lineage doesn't actually guarantee that you have the skills. A lot of time there's some dude, you know, who really trained with the teacher a lot more who's not. I mean, even some of my one of my instructors is in a similar kind of a boat where there's quite a few other people in the lineage who they were named to be. They were like, oh no, you're the important guy, and you're going to carry on the lineage. And they basically, those people basically bought their way in. And you know, the person I trained with spent a lot more time with the grandmasters. So this is something that goes on all the time. So it makes sense. I get not even wanting to dip your toe in that, especially when there's
Right.
much more interesting things to look
Really,
at.
I'm only kind of interested in the sense that like it's nice to see where it connects. Like, oh, he learned this from this, but I'm not trying to like discredit somebody. I'm not interested in doing that at all. And you know, as you can see in the world today, I mean, obviously we're in the future in the modern world. So you see these kind of situations occurring, like you know absolutely that those same situations occurred in like, you know, the 1800s and the 1700s and the 1600s and so I feel it's not. I think time could be better spent either training or studying than worrying about like, you know, checking everybody's paperwork. Like, you
Yeah,
know,
totally. Especially when there's a high chance you go through it and check it all, and the paperwork isn't even legitimate.
well, there's a lot of forgeries. I got a book on just like Japanese forgeries, especially in the Edo era. A lot of people like, oh, I'm a peasant. I don't want to be a peasant. How about I'm a rich, I've become a rich merchant. You know, they'll buy a lineage. They'll buy like a map. I got to forge a map to show that they own more property than they really do. They forge whole books about about their lineage or something like that.
Do you
They
think
forge.
that's a problem that was created by the strictness and rigidity of the structure of law? Like there were no opportunities to do these things through other means, so people were just like, "Hey, like this is the only way to get it done, so I'm gonna forge it."
Well, I think a lot of people they wanted, credibility. They wanted credibility for themselves. And I mean, there's even I don't know if you're aware there was a written language. So Japanese didn't have a written language, or at least there's no evidence of a written language before they adopted Chinese characters from China, right? The kanji, right? So during the Edo era, they discovered a bunch of documents written in a pre-contact with China script, supposedly. But these
Huh,
were all found to be they were all found to be forgeries.
huh.
So they found these old scripts. It's called Kamyo Jindai Moji. It's called Jindai Moji, and it's just a fake script made up because they didn't want to admit that the first writing system in Japan was imported from China. So they just made it up out of whole cloth. And so they were a little bit. They were just bored and wanted to like make some stuff up and cause a stir. So there's a lot
Yeah,
of
I
probably.
remember when I was in Japan, we went to this performance of this particular type of music. I can't remember the name of it, but
Uh-huh.
they were like, yeah, this is the oldest music in the world. And I'm like, really? I'm like, that just doesn't sound like a verifiable claim. Like, you mean nobody sang a song before this? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, it seems unlikely. I mean, people probably been making flutes in like 20,000 BC, or
yeah.
drums or something. Like, come on, man. Like,
I was like, I don't know about that. Like, oldest form of music. I'm like, this is very fishy.
so I mean, like you said, there was a lot of conflicting, there's a lot of motivations to, forge documents. And one of them is if you get credibility, then you can, it influences your business. You get more students in if you're
Yeah.
seen, a direct descendant of Miyamoto Musashi or something like that. Like,
Yeah, totally. No, that
so,
makes perfect sense. Why? I mean, it makes sense why people would do that. I mean, I think it's similar to also why you get the claim that martial arts were either delivered in visions or by Tengu, like it's like, oh, like Tengu showed up and showed me this, right? That's a way of legitimizing something, especially to in a certain time period into a certain culture. Nowadays, we might hear something like that and find it to be a little bit fishier. You're better off saying like, "Oh no, this came to me. I had a stroke of intuition," and people might actually find that to be legitimate. But back in the day, it had to be something else.
That's probably exactly what happened is that a lot of these people, those historical masters, when they came upon the revelations, they weren't like some guy starting from zero. They are people that have been
Yes.
training their whole lives rigorously. And in fact, they were at a point in their lives when who's the guy that founded Shinkageryu? Kami.
Yeah. Yagyu Munenori. He might not have been the
Well,
founder.
Kami Izumi, he was one of those
Yes.
guys that went into a cave, and he was not set. He was like not satisfied with his progress, and so he went on a pilgrimage to try to figure something out, and he did. And the story is that it was inspired in a cave and everything, but it's like it was him, probably and a couple of guys just like going round and round, and finally they figured out how it works,
Yeah,
and
totally. I mean,
and then.
you see this with quite a few things. I remember when I with Reiki, which I studied forever ago, that there's this whole like myth that he had this stroke of insight on a mountain, and these symbols were hitting him in the head, and in reality, he could have just been sitting down somewhere thinking hard about these things, and
Mhm.
the contextualizing it in that kind of like creation myth type story. I think it was a good way to legitimize things.
I mean, the other thing is that you go out in the countryside and some of those, like, on top of those, Japan is really mountainous and it's really like deep valleys and stuff. And you get in some of those areas and, nowadays we're in modern society, but back in the day, there was nothing out there.
Yeah.
You're in this little temple, there's nothing around you for miles and miles, and all you're drinking is like well water and like, weird, really rough food, it might set the stage for some kind of revelation.
Yes. No, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, there's I think this is kind of acknowledged in Shinto and also Shugendo, is like there's a sort of magic to just being in the woods, just
Oh,
like getting out
yeah.
into nature and really like connecting with it, and it does alter your consciousness. So it makes sense that people would have these sort of insights in connection with those types of trips, and that there would be this sort of connection between like ninjutsu and senjutsu. Maybe you could talk a little bit about senjutsu and what that is, because that's something that I've always been kind of interested in and curious about.
Uh, I have been as well, and I haven't found a lot of information that is uh, really digestible. I've only found one book, one short book on it, and it's not really. It just touches on the various topics on how. The thing is that it starts immediately goes into Taoism,
Yeah.
and then like it also has like aspects of Mikyo Buddhism. So like right off the bat it just kind of like diverges, so it's a little bit hard to pin down. So I was hoping through a little bit more research into Shugendo I would be able to understand it, but unfortunately I think it's what do you know about it?
You, basically my take on what I've looked into is that there's these connections to Shigendo and Shinto practices, and that ultimately it's a wandering version of those practices, right? So like you have sort of like you have the same thing in Tibetan Buddhism, and also in Indian in the Indian contemplative tradition, where you have individuals who are organized in like a monastic fashion, and they
Mm,
are living in monasteries and practicing in a very orthodox way. And then you have individuals who are pretty much practicing and participating in very similar religious material, but
mhm.
their approach is to wander as opposed to being in the monastic life, and they tend to be sort of like uh, on the frontier, so to speak. And their practices generally, if I was to generalize them, tend to be heterodox in the sense that
Yeah.
they are following the tradition, but their interpretation and expression of it is unique, and it's allowed to develop that way because they're away from the orthodoxy of the rest of the monastics.
Mm. Yeah, that's generally what I think. You probably put it in better words than I can. I'm just I definitely feel like there's a martial aspect that comes into some of these practices, like Shugendo seems to be on the very border of where martial arts, martial arts spiritualism and like just the spiritualism without the martial arts exists. So there's a inherent, almost like a danger in the Shugendo that it's like it's so close to like being a martial art. Uh, uh, and and right in there is you have the Sohei from like in various times of Japan they had warrior monks that went around and were basically running the show in large parts of Japan. So they were simultaneously very devout monks and also very fierce warriors that used like fought with halberds, naginata,
Yeah.
and uh, and then even later and even deep into the Edo era, there was like the Hozoin Ryu spear fighting temple in Nara. So there's interesting overlap where like Shugendo seems like they just pushed the martial arts out of it, uh, but they're still into the intense training. It's like intense training, intense
Yes.
non-martial arts training. They just edged out of martial arts, took all the
Well, I
weapons.
think that this is something that I've seen other places too. Like in India, they have these Naga Babas, and the
Mm,
Naga Babas are known for being not just mystics and being like an order, but also for their martial arts and their fighting, that they're warriors.
mhm,
Um, I think when it comes to even in the case of monasteries, there's some value in the pre-modern world in having martial arts and doing martial arts, in that you can protect the monastery, which I think
mm.
seems odd to a lot of people. It's like, why would somebody attack the monastery? Well, it wasn't exactly off limits, right?
Right,
So
right,
people would
right.
do it whether they were bandits, or it would sometimes, in some cases, it was the government. You see this happening all over China, Japan. So it makes sense that they would develop like fighting styles and ways to protect themselves. And
Mm,
especially if you're one of these traveling guys who isn't doesn't have strength in numbers or any kind of protection from anyone. You can't rent it the same way that like a monastery could. The monastery might be able to afford to hire some guards or pay
mhm,
off some people who are trying to loot them. But if you're a traveling individual, of course you're going to probably develop these skills. And I think what you
mm.
said about the hard training is also very important, and that's why in quite a few traditions that we see this overlap between like mysticism and martial arts. I mean, it's pretty big in the modern context. It's you see it a lot with Zen, right? The austere, hard training of Zen is often compared and mixed with martial arts training, with varying degrees of legitimacy and authenticity. But nevertheless, it's something that people do, and I do believe that even being a martial arts competitor myself, that there's a great deal of overlap and mutual benefit to be had. That the meditation practice will enhance your martial arts, but it also will enhance who you are outside of your martial arts training. So I think that there's a lot of crossover and benefit, and I see a lot of reason why historically these practices would have been linked.
Mm. Well, I mean, the the earliest example is, how karate was supposedly developed. Again, at a Zen temple in China, the monks were very devout and and sincere with their Buddhist, intense Buddhist training, but they lacked their physical side was lacking, and the Dharma was saying, "Well, you guys are, you're lacking. Your body's not going to be able to back up what you're preaching, and if you can't back it up, it's not complete." So
Yeah.
he fully developed it. So, and again, it was Zen Buddhism. So at one point, the Zen Buddhism, which, like you said, you mentioned it's important in martial arts, but it's kind of like a little thing you add in. Whereas back in that first period at the Shorinji Temple, it was like 50-50,
Yeah.
There were it was really intense. And then later on you have, of course, Takuan Soho and Yagyu Munenori when he made the book about Zen and the sword, how the
Yeah,
Zen and
the unfettered mind.
right, the Zen and the sword are one. So I actually just did a translation of a version of that, but it's slightly different. Yeah, apparently it's one of these books that there's many slightly different versions. So it doesn't, it's
Is that
different.
out yet? I'd love to
Yeah.
check that
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. It's, I forget what I titled it. It's by Taco and Soho. So
I'm gonna have to find that because I've noticed a similar thing with certain texts is that there's various versions of it and various
right.
translations I'm always fascinated to look at that because sometimes there's something that occasionally I'll be reading it like this actually makes no sense, and then you look at another version of it and it's fixed. There
Right.
was a
Right.
move in qigong that was like it was something like Wu Song hits the tiger. And
Yeah.
I was always, it was driving me crazy for years. I'm like, why is he hitting the tiger? Like, what are they talking about? And then it
Right.
turns
Right.
out that he carries the tiger back to the mountain. And I'm like, okay, well, that actually makes sense with the movement. Like, it more looks like that. And that's
Right.
a coherent sentence.
A lot of it, sometimes it comes with experience. You just, I started out translating judo and jujutsu books and then kenjutsu, moving into kenjutsu and stuff like that. And, some of the same themes that are talked about in jujutsu appear in kenjutsu and also in like karate and other martial arts. So there's some overlap. And once you do more of those, read more of those books, you see more of the overlap, which is a little bit
Yeah.
like my theory of translating. At first, I thought I was going to solve all the ninjutsu questions when I translated that first Ninjutsu no Gokui book. Like, this is going to solve everything. And it didn't solve everything. It's not even close.
Yeah.
So it's basically like none. I don't think any of my books into the books I translated individually are like gonna like knock it out of the park. But you have to see how you have to read a bunch of them. Then you see how things overlap a lot, and that's where the real learning is going to take place. Is
No, I think you're spot on. I think that's actually such a good point is, our understanding of things oftentimes becomes self-referential, right? So
Mhm.
you get within a certain sphere and you're trying to understand something. And a lot of times this doesn't give a very good picture of what it really is. I recently had this, it was like Sunday, I had this epiphany because I was training sumo and I've competed in sumo for a
Oh
while.
wow.
But I never had formal sumo training. Like I was just using judo and
Mhm.
Chinese wrestling and Mongolian wrestling and other stuff that I've practiced to kind of cheat at sumo. I never really knew
Yeah.
sumo, but I was studying the supari, like the striking in sumo,
Yeah.
and I realized I was like, wow, like this actually makes all Japanese martial arts make so much more sense to me that this is sort of the most brute approach to martial arts. And I said, well, why do they have these blocks? You see all these like this organization of blocks in Japanese derived martial arts. Like why are they
Mm.
blocking like that? And it makes perfect sense when you think about if you had a sumo wrestler coming at you doing these very linear palm
Right. Right.
strikes.
Right.
It's like this is the next evolution towards subtlety, right? So it's like, oh, if I'm just driving straight in, okay, well now you have this sort of eight directional, almost like a bagua mirror of blocks to
Oh,
defend
right. Right.
against this central attack. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, these Japanese martial arts, they're not like they're referencing themselves, but there's also kind of referencing sumo in a way in some of what they do, which it it's actually a really big problem in martial arts. And I was talking about this with another martial artist recently over coffee. It was like, you know, all of the systems that we do become self-referential. We have this problem that when you're doing martial arts, it becomes okay. Well, now I'm dealing with somebody who does what I do, right? And I think this is really big with Japanese martial arts in that you see the counter and the whole system is organized to deal with somebody who's essentially doing a similar thing. Like,
Mm.
for example, if you introduce European sword fighting to versus like a samurai, it turns into a big mess because the samurai style of fighting is all designed to deal with other people who are fighting in a similar manner with a similar code of ethics and conduct. And when you take somebody who's just going to kind of flit around and try to stick you really quickly, it actually isn't so effective.
Mm. That's a good point. And when it's good to a lot of the old what do you call it? I was reading up on Funakoshi Gichin, right? The found
Yeah.
Shotokan karate. His son, both him and his sons, they studied other martial arts as well. Like his son Gigo, who passed away at a young age, studied judo really hard apparently too. So that's you think of those as being like you wouldn't be a person that studies both, especially in that era. But he did. He studied both just to and he used what he learned from judo and incorporated it into how he was kind of revolutionizing what was happening in the Shotokan. Also, about Japanese martial arts, there's a lot of um, you mentioned like the way that the people in the way the striking's done. A lot of the strikes it really focuses on kyusho, the vital striking points of the body, which connects directly to like acupuncture and stuff like that. So
Yes.
a lot of those old style fighting was every strike was aimed, every strike was like with a certain kind of fist aimed at a certain point.
Yes.
You're constantly training like that, not because like you're gonna hit somebody here and completely what do you call it? Dislocate their elbow, but if you're always aiming for like the most vital point of the body, you're going to be able to inflict more damage. And that was like they were always in karate and jujutsu and in the sword arts as well. They're always trying to figure out how to like take the guy out from with like these really pinpoint attacks, which is a very interesting approach to martial arts. And even though a lot of these, like you mentioned, a lot of the arts you do are seem to be kind of complete, there are some aspects that I don't think have been trained fully. Um,
Yeah, I saw the same. I was reading a text by Kenji Tamiki, and he was talking about Atemi and Kansetsu Waza
yeah.
as very much in the way that you're talking about it. That he has a different notion of Atemi than they do in other styles of Aikido because he interprets it according to Judo. So
Hmm.
in other styles, they talk about Atemi as being striking the vital points, but his idea was that these points are they're biomechanical locuses, and that if you can manipulate them, whether through just linear sort of like pressing, like almost like the Supari and Sumo,
Hmm.
or through the manipulation of the joints, that you're exposing the biomechanical weaknesses of the opponent. So it's about understanding these articulating points. I also think it that there's some relevance of armor to this, that certain locations on the body are vital, and they're vital for movement and freedom of movement, so that these points may have remained exposed even when somebody was heavily armored.
Well, there's a whole school, Jujutsu was kind of like going into the Warring States period. They had what was called Kogusoku, which was like fighting close quarters combat fighting in armor. And it was basically when you're on the ground, you don't have any weapons left. I don't have any weapons left, and we're going at it. So it's kind of like maybe I'm going to come at you with judo. Maybe I still have like a short knife. At any
Yes.
rate, it's fighting in that close, really, really close arena. And that kind of training is like uh, you know, as it moves through the Edo era, it kind of lost. No one was going to be walking around, no one's going to be wearing armor anymore. So it became like wearing clothing or maybe so they basically trained just in clothes, street clothes right after the Warring States period. Nobody wore armor. And it wasn't until the mid Edo era when they started developing like kendo armor and like protective gear. Everyone just got destroyed in training up until like, the early 1700s or whatever, when they finally just started to, what do you mean you're wearing armor in school, in sword school? No, no, you're out there getting your forearm smashed by like, by bamboo swords and stuff like that. But so yeah, that aspect has been kind of lost because no one can really train in armor anymore because it'd be prohibitively expensive to. I
Yeah.
mean, there are some very small schools that do it, and it's amazing to watch. Like I've seen a few demonstrations in Japan, and it's
Uh,
amazing to watch. But yeah, how did they actually fight when completely dressed in armor? What are the weak points? Like you said, that's definitely worthy of research, but kind of hard to research unless you have like millions of dollars to buy multiple sets of armor, and don't mind if they get all like destroyed in the process.
yeah, no, really. I mean that would be like you said, probably prohibitively expensive. And also, it's interesting too because you see this divide between schools that kind of shows up, I guess in the time of modern times, like in the time of the Meiji,
Mm.
is that there's kind of two approaches. And I always say this, and I never mean it to belittle the approach, because I think it's a lot of fun and there's a lot of validity to it. But you essentially have the cosplay approach, where we're gonna try to emulate everything historically that people who did this thing were doing. We'll wear certain clothes, we'll make it look like them, we'll do the same moves as them. And then you have the sort of like randori combat sports approach, where it's like, we're going to try to get the skills they had by playing games, basically. We're going to design some games with rules that are safe enough to play, and similar enough to what people were doing, and hopefully we'll get some of the same skills. So I think you see like kind of two approaches to maintaining these skills in modern times.
Yeah, again, like kind of like with the lineage issue, I think those are both good approaches. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
there's definitely good and bad points, like if you train in street clothes, that's most likely what you're gonna, if you're ever in a fight, that's most likely what you're gonna be wearing. You're not gonna be wearing like a hakama and a dogi.
Yes.
So you can see that. On the other hand, like hakama and dogi is the traditional way you practice, and you kind of practice in that traditional style. So, I mean, yeah, I'm not that I mean both I think both of those approaches are fine as long as you're, training with gusto. Yeah, go at it,
Yeah.
right?
I also think it helps to be aware of what you're doing, like if you know that you're trying to emulate all of the historical aspects of something that you're doing, you can learn a lot from that, as long as you're aware that that's what you're doing, right? I think
Right.
that's a factor as well. Um, and on the flip side, there's a lot of people who do randori based stuff and they don't recognize the limitations inherent in that. And it's something
Mm.
I kind of take for granted, because I participate in so many different rule sets that I never get to a place where I'm just like, oh, I default to a particular rule set. It's like, no, I have to know what it
Mm.
is that I'm doing that day and be aware of it and stick to the rules of that. So I feel like there's a level of adaptability in what I do that
Well,
makes me
yeah,
feel
you're
like
you're
we're
doing sumo, but you also did Mongolian sumo. I'm like, how do you stop yourself from kicking them in the leg?
yeah, yeah. So like that's the thing, is like I never
That's
have those
okay in Mongolian
problems.
sumo, but
I like literally don't have any of those problems, and people always ask me like, "Oh, do you ever like forget what you're doing and break the rules?" And I'm like, "No, like I'm not an idiot. Like I know where I am, And there's something for me at least of like, if I'm in a particular environment, like if I'm in a sumo ring and there's a big fat guy and a mawashi across from me, like there's no part of me that all of a sudden thinks that I'm kickboxing. Like like the context and the environment is so different to me that I'm just like I'm not an idiot, guys. Like I know,
all right.
I'm like I know what's happening.
That's great.
One
Yeah.
thing I wanted to ask you is,
Yeah.
in terms of like understanding these types of things,
Hmm.
how do you feel? Obviously, you've taken the approach to do a lot of research, but how do you feel about kind of like the approach of trying to sort of reinvent stuff? Because that's something that I've played with quite a bit.
Hmm.
Is I'll take something that is like lost and doesn't exist, and I'll just say, all right, like I'm gonna do my best with the knowledge that I have to recreate this in. Sometimes I'm looking for authenticity, like I'm like, oh, I want to figure out what kind of training they did in Bagwajang for light body skill, like Qigong, like
Hmm.
jumping, which is something that Bagwajang is supposed to have historically, but most of the time in most lineages has been lost, right? And then
Hmm.
other times I'll just say, hey, like I want this skill. I'm gonna try to engineer it using whatever is available to me. And I'm just
Hmm.
curious, is this something like? Do you feel like this is what like Fujita Seikyo was kind of doing in some ways? Was sort of looking at what was available to him and what he could figure out, and going, okay, I'm going to recreate what Ninja did as best as I can. Or, does it obviously, there's a question of lineage, but, or was he
Hmm.
more, doing things in a traditional fashion than that?
He definitely is. Fujita Seiko, he lived he was born in the late, when was he born? Late, like 1890s or something like that. And he lived to like 1960s. So he went around and he was going around training with a lot of different schools. So he was kind of like going and, trying to get his hands on any kind of martial arts he could. So he studied, he was friends with the karate guys like Mabuni Kenwa and also Wada Ryu and just all sorts of different schools of Shuriken Jutsu. He went to and found these Shuriken schools, and then he re meticulously copied any documents they would let him have access to. So he did a little bit of both. So he did the, what do you call it, like book, just physical copying research. He also tried to go to the schools and study the materials, and he also what do you call it? Drew illustrations of how techniques were done. And
Mm.
I'm not sure how much of that he actually learned or how much he got through just documentations. Mm.
So
As
in a
far as
sense, he was kind of using all of those methods available to him, and but ultimately creating sort of his own resynthesis of things, because you're pulling from these different schools and kind of
mm,
like weaving it together. I personally tend to feel like this is a good method for figuring these things out when they've been lost, is like you can kind of like triangulate it based off of
mm,
some things that are related. Occasionally the issue though is the end product, right? You don't know if what you end up with, how close it was to the actual thing, if you've incorporated things that are a good and they're entirely a good idea and make sense to incorporate, but weren't actually done historically.
mm. So we did the martial arts I did. We do spear and we're training in a regular dojo. We used like a light kind of wood with like basically pipe cleaner padding on the end as the points, right? And
A
it's
giant Q-tip.
yeah, basically it's a giant Q-tip, right? And it's cut the training, right? But and we asked him about training back in the day. He's like, yeah, they used to train at night, in the Meiji. I'm like, oh, would they have like lanterns? He's like, yeah, no, they just had one candle in the dojo, like on the kamiza, or the two candles on the kamiza. I'm like, two candles on the Kamaizan, you trained. They trained spear. Like, yeah, yeah, let's do it right now. So we did it. We trained spear with like the lights from two tiny candles on the Kamiza. And man, that was like, it really left a strong impression on me because it was like you lost all sense of depth.
Yeah.
The lights come, it's a pale light coming from one side or from your right side. Your left side's good, it's completely dark, and the guy's getting ready to attack you. You just like you have no, it was just like it was
Wow.
a really, and he wanted us to do the same techniques with the same intensity, and it was a very revealing experience. So I definitely think experimentation is a good part of martial arts. I think it's essential, and at the same time, I was also warned to avoid kyo bimbo, which is a jack of all trades but a master of none.
Yeah.
In the West, it's kind of like, oh, it's a guy, he can do anything. He can fix your sink or repair your roof. But in Japan, it's a little bit like, you try to do too much, you end up not being able to focus on anything. So I've always tried to
Yeah.
keep that in mind. Try to, while it is absolutely, I would say experimentation and looking out is important. If you go too far outside trying to like, recreate something, are you just kind of spinning your wheels, or is there real research happening?
Yeah, no, there's something to be said for depth in a particular area. I think
Mhm.
that just in the same way that studying multiple things provides you with context, that you also gain context from going really deep into a particular thing, and that there's
Right.
certain things that you can only learn that way. And if you don't make that effort to have something be primary focus of study or practice, that you could say you kind of lose everything,
Mm.
because you don't have that depth in a particular area.
Mm-hmm. So I try to, I say that, but I've done like, 100 books on like, 35 different topics. I've translated 100 books on 35 different topics. So, I'm not entirely sure I'm following my own advice, but I have a clear goal of trying to try to connect as much of the information about martial arts uh, uh, and make it available for people to do more research with.
Yeah, no, I mean some of the stuff that I've read from you is just so fascinating and really rekindled my interest in these topics, which
Mm.
I kind of that people had kind of dictated to me that no, these were dead ends and there was nothing there. And when I saw your work for the first time, I was like, oh my God, there's real stuff about this. This is so cool. I got really excited. I want to ask you because we're kind of running low on the time here and
Uh-huh.
moving towards wrapping up. But what were like your favorite translations that you've done? Like, which are the ones that you're the most excited about, and you really were like, this is super cool. I know that you said that individually the pieces that you've translated sort of aren't that they're less than the sum of their parts, that when you look
Mm.
at all of them together it gives you a better picture of things. But I'm curious if there are any things in particular that you were like, oh, this one was really cool and really interesting and people should start with that.
One book that's a little bit off the beaten path is called How to Travel Safely in Japan. And it was a book about it was actually a bestseller in like 1800 in Japan, and it was the best way to prepare for a trip to somewhere, and how to navigate the roads, how to stay at the correct hotels, and how to avoid common pitfalls, and also how to stay safe. Make sure you always lock your door first.
Yeah,
First thing, it has really interesting practical advice. Like the first thing you do when you get to the hotel is make sure, check the exits. You know,
yeah,
when you go to bed at night, put your footwear right below your bed and have all your stuff packed, and
yeah.
make sure the door locks and things like that. And when the porters are unloading your horses, make sure you watch them until everything's unloaded. Don't leave anything to chance.
That's pretty cool. No,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
funny that you
And
mentioned
and
that.
the same book is like, if you're concerned the boat might be cursed, do this procedure. It's like it just straight up has magic in it, like right
Yeah.
in the middle of like, make sure your shoes are tied securely but not too tight, and then like, oh, if you get possessed by a fox, do this. It's like I love it. It's very fun.
It's funny, like I brought him up earlier, but Ed Calderon actually does classes in that
Uh-huh.
exact topic. He calls them like urban movement, right? Is
Right,
like
right.
if you're gonna go to this city, like how do you move through that city, effectively and comfortably, so it's
Right.
actually, that's in a way it's like that's such a ninja topic, that's like that's the crux of it right there, is
Mhm.
how do you move around safely, right? So that's pretty fascinating. That sounds like a cool one. I'll have to check it out. uh
And actually, the other one was the ninja books are the ninja book about the very first Gingetsu Ito book, the very one he did before in 1909. I really like that one because the author, kind of like us, just sort of discovered ninjutsu, and he's got a very enthusiastic style. He's very enthusiastic about the material ninjutsu, and it's cool to read a book in 1909 about a guy that's thrilled about ninjutsu. And what else was there? There was another one. What was it? Which one did I really like? And I've also done some books on tattooing.
like
That was
Ainu stuff.
Yeah. Well, it covers. I did tattooing as punishment, which covered all the different kinds of tattooing, and focusing on the punishment tattoos that were done in Japan. They caught criminals and they tattooed them to show that they were a criminal, so everyone around would know that that person had committed a crime. And I didn't realize that the tattoos were not the only punishment. You usually got a beating, a tattooed, and then you were banished to like a distant island, or
Oh
you were
man.
banished from the areas of Edo. Yeah, so it was like a set. It was like part of a set. So it was a 3-point set. Oh, we're gonna give you a nice beating, and then we're gonna tattoo you, and then we're gonna send you on your way. So it was like it
Oh
wasn't that.
man.
Yeah, so that was interesting to find that. And
Next time I'm
actually,
time traveling, I'll be sure not to get in trouble during Edo period in Japan.
yeah, yeah, and they ship these people out to islands, Ogasawara Island, like just
Yeah,
hundreds of miles away, and like there's nothing there, man. Just like
yeah.
and probably also I was interested to learn that the Kuji. I'm not, you mentioned you got a Kuji book, but I've done three. And the first one I did, it was like a simple version of Kuji.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. And then the third book I did was called Secrets of Kuji. And man, that book is so dense. There's so much material.
Yeah.
And like basically
That's the one I have is the Secrets of Kuji.
right. So if you get that the very first one I did, I can't remember what it's called, the very first Kuji I did, and look at that one. And you're like, man, this is like so much has just been stripped out of this to make it more what do you call it?
Essentialized.
Yeah, it's been essentialized and also highly simplified to make it easier for people to use. So,
Yeah.
that Secrets of Kuji was like, it's a couple hundred pages long, and
Yeah.
the other one it's like 30, and it's like,
Yes.
and so a lot of that just shows the how what we study now. There was a whole lot more to that back in
Yeah.
the there was a whole lot more to that back in the past.
Well, there's
So
a very similar phenomena with like Tibetan Buddhist cycles. So like if you have like if you look at, let's say, Longchen Ninting, right, which is from Longchenpa, Dzogchen, like Nyingma style cycle, it's really expanded, right? Like there's a lot of material there, and that's not even the most what do you call it, verbose one, right? But then if
right,
you look at like Yuthok Ninting, it's the same practice. Like you have Tumo practice, and it's a page long versus
right.
being 30 pages. And it's interesting, in the notion in Tibetan Buddhism is often the opposite of what you would expect, is that the really verbose stuff is more basic than the essentialized one, that it's actually, it takes more skill and knowledge to work with the essentialized version of the practice rather than the one that's expanded. But
Well,
I'm
and
not sure if it's
that's
the same with the Kuji.
well that is exactly what they pared it down to the essence of it, and this is all you really need to do this enact this spell to it's folk magic, but folk magic kind of has a little bit of a derogatory term. It seems a little bit like you're not taking it seriously, but it's folk magic, uh, and they because it's kind of an amalgam of lots of different aspects of religion and some
Yeah.
native. It's Taoism and plus like a little bit of Mikyo plus a little bit of localization that really doesn't have anything to do with anything. Shinto, like the basic Shinto, it's all kind of smashed in there.
You're right, though. It's funny that the term folk has this like derogatory sense, because when you talk about like folk practices, we're basically talking about what people actually do, So
Yes,
it's
yes, they
like,
actually did this.
this is what
Thousands
people
and
actually
thousands of
do. So
people
it's like,
did
why are
it.
we
They
being
did it.
derogatory
Yes,
about it?
yes. And that's how it actually got popularized too, because it was accessible. And that's exact like I think it was not Kukai, Shinra in like I think it was 1100s or something in Japan. He was the one that before to be reincarnated, you had to learn all these, the entire Lotus Sutra, right? And that's
Yes.
beyond the capacity of most people. But Shinra, I think it's Shinra and another guy, he basically said, all you have to do is repeat praise Amida Buddha. All you have to do is repeat that. And so that was on one hand, it was like a huge scandal. On the other hand, people, began using that.
Yeah.
And
No, that's super interesting. It makes perfect sense too that they would go and they would do that. Well, I really appreciate you doing this. This has been fantastic. I learned a lot. I got a lot of my questions about the ninja answered. I encourage everybody to check out your books. It's through Shinobu Books, correct?
yeah, you can just search Eric Shahan on Amazon and a bazillion books will come up. So feel free to look around for something you like. I'd appreciate it. I publish everything independently. I don't have a publisher or an editor, but I work diligently on my books. So please, if you have time, give them a look.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the work that you're doing. You get a lot of texts out there that I think otherwise wouldn't be, and provides the opportunity for nerds like myself to read this stuff without having to learn Japanese. So really
Well,
appreciate your work, and thank you for doing the podcast, man.
yeah, thank you, Jamie. Thank you for having me on. Look forward to talking to you again.